My name is Richard Kazis. I'm Senior Vice President at Jobs for the Future here in Boston. It's great to see such a packed room this afternoon for this session, but I want to make sure you're all packed into the right room. So this is the session on designing and implementing credentials and skill certifications that provide passports to work. Okay, everyone is in the right place. Good. We had an OSHA discussion a minute ago and decided that, to protect our panelists, we're not going to ask them to get up and come to the microphone because of danger in back. So they're going to sit where they are. We're going to move the microphone around, but I think it will all work out. I'm going to give a couple of minutes of framing remarks, then I'm going to introduce the panelists who represent an incredible wealth of knowledge, information, experience in industry-based credentialing. So then they're each going to make a short presentation, then we're going to open it up to questions from me, then questions from you, discussion back and forth. The 80 minutes will fly by, okay? Here's the issue, and I think it's really exciting that so many of you chose to come to this session. As you know, recently, there has been much greater attention to the issue of sub-baccalaureate post-secondary credentials, particularly those that are valued and recognized by employers. This was a discussion 20 years ago, as Dr. Packer will tell you, more than 20 years ago around the time of the Scans Commission, but in the past few years it's become even more significant and more visible for several reasons. First, research that you heard earlier today that demonstrates that when you start to pull apart BAs, associate degrees, one-year certificates, industry credentials, that there are many credentials that you can earn that are sub-baccalaureate, that are maybe even sub-associate degree level, that pay off in the labor market better than some associate degrees and baccalaureate degrees. So we're talking maybe 20 to 30% of industry credentials that have a significant payoff in the labor market, more than many associate and baccalaureate degrees. So that, of course, gets people's attention. Second is a campaign that many of you are aware of from within the foundation community, including the Lumina, primarily or particularly the Lumina Foundation, which has said we need 23 million post-secondary credentials by 2025 to catch up to our international competitors. And when they did the numbers recently, they have a new strategic plan out. They decided and concluded that we need 10 million sub-BA certificates in that period between now and 2025 in order to make that leap of 23 million new credentials. So that gets your attention as well. And third, we have the drumbeat from employers that we have heard today about how difficult it is to find skilled workers with the technical skills, with the soft skills, with the range of skills that enable them to move quickly and effectively into the jobs that are available. So those three things together have increased both the visibility of the issue and the importance of looking at industry credentials in the US. And meanwhile, while all of this has been going on, a number of industries, including those that are represented up here, have been working hard and making real progress in the development of more systematic, more transparent credentials that are valued by employers and that are of value to those who earn them. In computers and IT, with CompTIA, in manufacturing, National Association of Manufacturers and the Manufacturing Institute, in construction, NCCER, in energy and transportation, the National Coalition of Certification Centers represented here. And these industry-based certification systems are important for on two different levels. One, in their own right, for their industry, to be able to send better signals to employers, better signals to students, and to job seekers about what it takes to succeed in and move into that industry. But also, these efforts, these certification systems provide a glimpse of what could be the building blocks of a national system of industry-recognized credentials that are trusted, easy to understand, portable, and that have economic value to those who earn them. I don't know if it's been discussed yet in any of the sessions, but when people start to talk about industry certifications in the US, they often go and talk about Europe. Europe has a European framework of qualifications that start from the foundational and move to the advanced, that start from workforce and move all the way up into the highest of higher ed, that are aligned, transparent, comparable across the EU countries, based on learning expectations, and that are both vertically and horizontally aligned and integrated. So the question always when you start to talk about Europe and the US is like, well, what relevance does that have for us? What can we take from that? What can we learn from that? What can we do given our culture, our politics, our federalist system, our existing institutions of workforce credentialing? So I have a feeling that as you hear people present their systems in their industry, it will resonate and we'll start to have a conversation, and I hope we will, and I hope you'll ask if it's not going that way, about what are the implications of these individual certification systems for something more national, more linked, more transparent, more coherent. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. But as you know, in the US, we have like a clutter of disconnected, piecemeal, sometimes overlapping, usually unaligned ways of certifying skills, whether that's in K-12 and CTE, whether that's in post-secondary, in the community colleges, whether it's in our apprenticeship system, whether it's proprietary schools, whether it's in the training system itself, whether it's within industry and work-based. It's a lot of different stuff with a lot of different accrediting bodies, a lot of different credential granting bodies and systems, and it doesn't add up. And it's confusing, and it's certainly confusing to those who are trying to find their way towards a pathway to a career that pays long-term. So there are a lot of issues that are going to be put on the table, issues of credit versus non-credit, general skills versus specific skills, as you heard Ron talking about at the end of lunch. Third-party validation or not, performance-based or not, portable or not, stackable or not. And there's no, so these issues we're going to look at first in each industry sector that we'll be presenting, and then we will be looking at broader questions across them. So I'm going to introduce briefly, because I think you have in your binders the bios of all the presenters, but let me introduce them briefly in the order in which they will speak. And I totaled it up from their bios. I think it's about 130 years of experience building, working in industry, building credentialing systems. I'm not going to say who had the most. We're not going to go there. So we're going to start with Ron Bullock, who's the chairman of the Manufacturing Institute and the chairman of Bison Gear and Engineering Corporation in Illinois. Then we're going to have Gretchen Koch, who's the senior director for workforce development at CompTIA, also in Illinois. She'll be followed by Steve Greene, Vice President for Workforce Development at NCCER in Gainesville, Florida. Fourth, Roger Tadajewski, Executive Director of the National Coalition of Certification Centers in Oklahoma. And then finally, Arnold Packer, former Director of the SCANS 2000 Center at Johns Hopkins University. Each one will present for about 5 to 7 minutes, then we'll go into questions and answers. Thank you. Ron?
Okay, I have a quick slide just to kind of get people thinking about what we might do if we reverse the trends in the manufacturing sector as a percentage of our GDP. It's currently about 11.6%. Yeah, here you go. So I'm sponsoring a study, an economic study done by the Aspen Institute. We'll actually be releasing this on March 26th. But there's some things that you need, common sense things that you need to do regarding, start negotiating export trade agreements again. Look at, rational energy policy. We're talking about tax and regulatory reform. I saw one think tank estimated the cost of the U.S. economy of regulations at $1.75 trillion. That's a lot of money. And then, of course, the most important thing is human capital. So the last time we were at 15% of GDP in the manufacturing sector was 1998. And our projections show that, if we can turn this around by 2025, we would need an additional 3.7 million workers, skilled workers in the manufacturing sector. The other demographic that we have going, of course, is with the boomer generation retirements. As I look at my own company, 50%, a full half of our workforce is eligible for retirement over the next 15 years. So I think if you look at 11.6 million workers in manufacturing right now, you could use a conservative 30 to 35%. That would at least double that number. So we need, 3.5 million skilled workers just to replace boomer retirements. And there's a lot, we'll talk, when we release the report, we'll talk about, the economic benefits. But I'd point out that Germany is carrying the common market pretty much on their backs, and they have an economy that is 23% of GDP in manufacturing. So, there's three ways to create wealth, right? As the old saw goes, you can grow it, you can dig it, or you can make it. And, we're good at making it in manufacturing. So, I just wanted to talk about the Manufacturing Institute. I chair that group. We just had our board meeting at the NAM meeting last week, and we have some, some very good metrics that we are doing. It was mentioned, the Lumina Foundation's looking at credentials. The president challenged the manufacturing sector to add 500,000 credentials over the next 5 years in 2010. And so that's one metric that we're measuring in the NAM's Manufacturing Institute Skilled Credentials Program. We generated 84,000 in 2011, 89,000 in 2012, for a total of 173,000. So we're on our way to achieving that 500,000. It's not 23 million, but it certainly is, making some progress. As we look at the needs that we have, I'm of the Sputnik moment generation, and worked my way through school in working in manufacturing in Dayton, Ohio, and wound up getting an aerospace engineering degree. At that time, when I was going to high school, you were just expected to take 4 years of math and science, and I snuck in machine shop and drafting at the same time. We had on the Apollo project 400,000 engineers working on the Apollo project. Average age 27 years old. Put a man on the moon with slide rules, math tables, big dumb adding machines we called computers, and the lowest bidder. So today, I was talking to a friend of mine at the National Science Foundation. Today, it would take us 6 years to graduate 400,000 engineering baccalaureates. We're putting out about 70,000 a year. Associate degrees in science and engineering and engineering technology, 2-year degree programs, 88,000 a year. So we have a long way to go. So at the the NAM, we basic partners: ACT, National Career Readiness Certificate, Manufacturing Skill Standards Certification, American Welding Society, National Institute of Manufacturing Standards, and then Society of Manufacturing Engineers. And then we've added partners as we've gone along. I think we're close to 50 partners in certifications right now. We have a good program in the Illinois that we're running. Pathways. Manufacturing is, we start off with the ACT and National Career Readiness Certification as a way to illustrate to our manufacturing members work readiness. And then we're doing 2 modules out in the MSSC, safety and quality, to make them, make people available for paid internships. We have a pilot program going at Harper College in the Chicago area that 70 manufacturers providing 200 paid internships. We have externship programs between terms, that sort of thing. So I think there are some challenges certainly in private sector working with the educational establishments. I think is one of the challenges I've seen, and we can talk about that. I'll turn it over to my fellow panelists to get their inputs.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm so glad to see so many of you interested in the role that industry certifications play in education and also in the workforce. In the IT industry, industry certifications have been playing an incredibly important role for over 20 years. The organization that and I apologize for not having this online, but I do have copies of this for you. This is a certification roadmap for the IT industry. And what it shows is beginning at the novice level all the way to the expert level in a number of different pathways within IT. So it could be networking, it could be network administration, it could be security, it could be database administration, it could be computer support and maintenance. From beginner to expert, all of the different certifications from all of the different certifying bodies that get an individual all along the way in those pathways through those different types of jobs within IT. And on the flip side, it shows you by certifying body all of the industry certifications that they have created and that are out there today for people who want to get into the IT industry as a technician, but also who want to keep advancing in the IT industry, how to move forward within IT through industry credentials. And so you're probably wondering, why is this so finely honed in IT? And the reason for that is because of the critical link that industry credentials play to jobs, quite frankly. And because of the critical role that they play in filling the over 250 to 350 open IT jobs that exist every single day in this country. That's just in this country. And the reason why those jobs are open, because there are not enough people with these knowledge and skill sets to fill the jobs that are open and waiting to be filled by IT employers. So it's been in the IT employer's best interest for a long time to define what the knowledge and skill sets are and to build industry credentials around them. And these certifications are different in a lot of ways, but they're similar in a lot of ways. Some of them are vendor specific and created by manufacturers like Microsoft and Cisco and Oracle. Others are what we call vendor neutral, that cut across platforms. My organization, CompTIA, which is the Computing Technology Industry Association, is the largest developer of what we call vendor neutral certifications that do cut across many, many platforms. And what we do and what these other certifying bodies do is work very closely with training and, more importantly, education institutions at both the high school and the post-secondary level to make available training and education so that students can take courses and actually have degree programs that align academic and industry credentials heading towards degree programs. So within high schools and career tech ed organizations around the country, you'll see programs in Microsoft. They're called Microsoft Academies. You'll see the same thing for Cisco. They're called Cisco Academies. And the same thing for Oracle and for CompTIA. And the way that it works is these industry certifications are what we call high-stakes credentials. And they have to pass a certain degree of rigor. Within CompTIA, we don't develop the certifications ourselves. We work with and for the industry to develop the certifications. So when we want to develop or upgrade a credential, we bring in the subject matter experts from industry who come in and define what are the knowledge and skill sets that are required for specific job functions within their area. Let's say it's security. We bring in the leaders in security from the business community, from government. We have a lot of people who come in from the military for security certifications, who work using our ANSI ISO 17024 approved process to develop the high stakes credential. And all of these high stakes certifications are updated on a regular basis. Every 3 years, our certifications go through that same process of bringing in these subject matter experts. It's usually over a 6-month period where they come in, do one phase, we do our work, then they come back 2 months later. You'll see them in our headquarters phasing in and out all the time. So it's a very rigorous process. And at the end of that, what's created and what's posted publicly are the objectives for each certification. And that serves as the course outline, if you will, for educators and trainers to create courses around those certification exams. And so we have thousands of high schools, as does Microsoft, as does Cisco, who have instructors who are very well able to teach to these courses to be able to get these certifications. And one of the things that we're always working for are programs within career and technical education that are providing dual credit opportunities so that the kids can start learning in high school and can start getting industry credentials in high school that not only will help them get a good job even before they get to their post-secondary education, but will give them course credit while they're in high school for secondary education, and it's creating a bridge and a pathway into college so that it truly is college and career readiness that's being provided with industry certifications playing a leadership role in that work.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As Richard had gone over the format by which we would speak, and since I knew I was following Gretchen, I thought I would take my notes and put them on an iPad to show that even in the construction industry that we have use of technology.
And these are my notes.
I wasn't going to point that out. I did want to take a minute and very similar to Doug Pruitt, one of my friends and one of our past chair of our board of trustees, I'm a product of career and technical education. I had the opportunity in high school to be enrolled in, as you would call it, vocational education. Had an opportunity to also work in the field as a surveyor and a carpenter before I started working into something I was probably a little bit better at than carpentry, and that's management. But I'm very proud of my background working in the trades, as well as the fact that during that time I was able to attain a college education. I want to take a minute and talk just about industry statistics. I think it's very important to somewhat ground the conversation we have today on credentials. Then I want to give a little bit of an NCCER overview, and finally start with a little bit of credentials review. Our nation is on the cusp of what I would call the new industrial revolution. I want to share some statistics, some that I have recovered from McGraw-Hill and Industrial Info Resources. Last month we added 48,000 new jobs in construction. We're down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 15.7% of unemployment within that industry from where we lost 2 million workers back in the 2006 to 2009 period when we were at 24% unemployment in 2009. However, residential construction is up across the United States, even in areas like Florida, California, and Nevada. Non-residential construction is up 6%. From 2013 through 2017, planned construction for more than 500 new projects along the Gulf Coast with a combined total of $152 billion in investment, double the current demand. One project being planned for the Texas-Louisiana border is rumored to be close to $15 billion alone. Hydraulic fracturing, or what we call or refer to as fracking, based on regulatory actions coming forward, is driving employment in Pennsylvania, the Dakotas, Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Labor demand for the next 4 years through 2016 shows an increase of 37%, from 88.7 million labor hours to 121 million labor hours. Crafts like welders, pipe fitters, and millwrights are already experiencing shortages. And by the way, $152 billion from a labor perspective, if you look at the simple mathematics, equates to 562,000 new workers over the next 4 years. The NCCER, by the way, is a nonprofit education foundation created to accredit organizations and to develop standardized curriculum for construction, maintenance, and manufacturing to include shipbuilding or maritime. We're located in Gainesville, Florida, outside of Gainesville. We are affiliated with the University of Florida, but we're also affiliated with a host of international partners to include Associated Builders and Contractors, Associated General Contractors of America, ACT, I see my friends in the back with ACT, the Construction Users Roundtable, or CURT, the Construction Industry Institute, Skills USA, the National Technical Honor Society, and also, as Ron represents, the Manufacturing Institute. And some of the statistics on credentials were actually provided from our organization to his. I wanted to say that we do have curriculum in 60 different trade areas and assessment and certification, some of which are ANSI accredited in 70 different areas. We have over 5,000 schools throughout the United States, to include secondary and post-secondary, career colleges, industry associations, contractors, owners, and labor unions. And we're also in 20 foreign countries and have translated our curriculum into a multitude of different languages. I did want to talk for a moment about credentials. From a training statistic, we have credentialed over 9 million completions through our national registry, and our annual student population is now over 500,000 just in the United States. From an assessment and certification statistic, without getting into a lot of detail, we have assessed journey-level workers in the United States, over 428,000 workers. Now, the scary part is that only 210,000 of those workers have actually passed their journey-level assessment, which means that we have about a 49% pass rate, meaning that if you take an assessment and you are expected to be paid and perform journey-level work, that you don't necessarily have those requisite skills. So I'll pass the microphone on now.
Good afternoon as well. My name is Roger Tadajewski. I'm the Executive Director of the National Coalition of Certification Centers. A couple things that I wanted to just touch on and bring to light today is that we heard some great speakers this morning, some great challenges, and heard about some of the other concerns and problems out there. But at the end of the day, in my perspective, we are in the most exciting times there can be in this country. Are they challenging? Absolutely. But if we go back and look at the early 1900s, and as we were moving from that piece and moving into the industrial age and the invent of the automobile, And as Nick mentioned this morning, moving from 7 million vehicles in the early 1900s to over 300 million today, and think about the technology that is in that vehicle today. You know, we drive those cars every day. We get to meetings like this. We go to work in them, and they're great transportation tools. But yet, if you turn them on their side, they're the most advanced physics lab there is in the world when you think about it. Okay? How many in this room, I'd like to get a show of hands, that when you press on your gas pedal, do you think you're actually moving anything? The reality is if you own a car that's newer than 1999, you're not. The only reason that gas pedal is there is you won't buy the car without it. Okay? Technology's in there. Okay? How many realize that you can actually buy a car today that you steer with, but is that actually not connected to anything? Again, you won't buy the car without the steering wheel. And the brake systems and all those pieces are coming. The other part in technology is historically, 5 years ago, before the recession, if you talked about the energy industry, whether that be coal, gas, wind industry, and the transportation industry, most people would say those are two totally different industries, other than the fact that we got to have gas to fill our cars and so forth. But actually going forward, energy and the transportation industries will be forever, for foreseeable future, two sides of the same coin. As we start to think about our tremendous supply of natural gas in this country, and how we're going to change that infrastructure. Governor Mary Fallon, I don't think, really touched on this piece because of the time, but if you, right now in Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, and the North Texas corridor, they are working on and implementing natural gas infrastructure, meaning that on the major interstates right now within Oklahoma and North Texas, you don't have to drive any more than, I think it's about 45 miles, and you'll have a CNG filling station. Okay. Your secondary roads are about 60 miles. That is all, in the next couple of years, will be as close as you can find gas stations right now. The auto industry is also making those vehicles available to the public. Honda, Chrysler Corporation, General Motors, Ford, all of them are either putting compressed natural gas vehicles and electric vehicles, as we know with Toyota, into the marketplace worldwide. Okay. The other part of this, though, is to think about what I think is exciting, is that all this technology requires new levels of training, new levels of leadership. But at the same time, I think Ron touched on the baby boomer generation, realize that as of today, or as of last year, 10,000 people per day are retiring. Now, we'll hear statistics are qualified. I know you mentioned you got ones that are ready, but there are people today retiring. I don't know if Pat Ainsworth is in here, a great friend of mine from California. He walked in here today and said, Roger, I retired last month. Okay, they're stepping out. So not only do we have new technology coming in, but we also have to think about knowledge transfer. That tremendous level of knowledge that, Ron, probably exists in your staff. And how do the young people that come into the workforce or that are transitioning workforce be able to pick up on that knowledge as well as the new skill sets? So over the next 10 to 15 years, community colleges and university systems are going to be the center point, the key linchpin of how we grow and excel in the world. When we think about global skill sets, and that's what they truly are, is whether you're at a Boeing, if you heard from Rick Stevens talk today, what he didn't have time to talk about is in a supply chain. Those of you that have technical colleges or community colleges or career tech centers in small towns, you are absolutely important, and maybe the most important, because in those supply chains where you have small shops, small manufacturing companies, maybe 10, 15, 50, 100 people, those skill sets and the understanding of productivity and how to use technology to compete in the marketplace are absolutely critical in that supply chain, because if that base doesn't have the technical skills in the human capital, Boeing cannot push that 787 out the door. And so NC3, National Coalition of Certification Centers, was pulled together to start to address these areas. Aviation, aerospace industry, the whole transportation industry, the energy industry. We talk about energy, everything from how we get energy out of the ground, solar, wind, and so forth, how we transport the national infrastructure to buildings like this today. So working with companies like Snap-on Tool Corporation that has tremendous diagnostic capability worldwide to help maintain and repair vehicles, all the way to a Trane Air Conditioning Corporation worldwide that is building systems for buildings like we have today. And just to give you a highlight a little bit about Trane, if we look at that, many of you may have an HVAC program in your community colleges, but really where it's going is the same thing as a technology in an automobile is in the buildings. The last point that I want to touch on is we talk about workforce development and how it impacts our employers. To me, one of the greatest challenges we have, and like to talk about it later on, is actually your workforce development for your community colleges. Where are you going to get your future instructors from? How are you going to develop them, the professional skill sets? How are they going to be able to interact with industry and move at a much faster pace? So those are some of the things that NC3 and the Coalition of Technical Community College and Universities, Career Tech Centers across the country, its industry partners, are all addressing and implementing and putting into place.
Thanks. You mind if I use that? That way I won't put myself to sleep. I was on going to one of the stores here in town and in a supermarket, and there was a counter that said 15 items or less, and there was some student with many more than 15. The person behind the counter said, "Are you from MIT and you can't read, or are you from Harvard and you can't count?" Which says something about skill sets. Before scans, I did some consulting work in Fort Worth. We brought in some employers. One was American Airlines, which has a hub in Fort Worth, and we talked about baggage handlers. And he first said, well, all they need to know is the 3-letter codes for the various. But when pressed, he said, oh, they need to know how to read safety instructions. In fact, we lost one baggage handler who got too close to the back end of a jet plane. And then I talked to an IBM guy, and he was hiring systems engineers. And he said, you know, I've got engineers who don't understand that when you do a schedule, you start with the due date and work back. The point of all of this is jobs are idiosyncratic. Can I get the first slide? There's some of them on the desk here, but when we did the scans process, this is well over 20 years ago, prehistoric, we started with tasks. We found you could not ask employers what skills they need and get a good answer. You started with tasks, which could be critical incident tasks. And then we say, well, what skills do you need to do that? So we observed those. We did over a couple of hundred tasks in different jobs. And we divided it for these purposes into 2 pieces. One is the character attributes, what some people call soft skills. Ron mentioned grit. That's a typical soft skill. There's been all this work in cognitive science. You may be familiar with a book by Paul Tough. You may be familiar with James Heckman's work, which says the GED, which is where most of our training federal dollars goes into, is not very useful at all. In fact, it's worthless. And yet that's what we continue to test. But character outputs like self-control, sociability, responsibility were very important, and that's the business about coming to work on time and having a professional attitude. More important to most employers than calculus. But then there were problem-solving competencies, things like, can you put together a schedule? Can you communicate? Can you do teamwork? And then the next step is you develop tasks, and you observe and assess the student performance at what I call learning-rich work. So, and I'll show you something from a summer job for a youngster out of a very disadvantaged high school in Baltimore. And in school, it's project-based learning, where again in Baltimore, we did that, and that's where you watch teamwork. The best analog is sports or art or music. I don't want to choose a shortstop because he can answer a question on what are the 12 characteristics of fielding a baseball. Just go out there and play, right? The same thing with a violinist or a painter. And people subjectively, scouts and others, or coaches subjectively evaluate performance. Next slide, please. Oh. You just, no, wrong way. Yeah, I don't have the skill. All right. The key is performance. If you read any of those stories in the New York Times where they have CEOs talk about what they want in somebody, it's performance. Now, that performance is in a context. Responsibility on a construction job is not like responsibility in an operating theater in a hospital. It's still responsibility, it's cross-industry, but it is a different thing. Of course, you need the basic and higher order skills, but you need the problem-solving competencies and the character attributes of responsibility, self-control. And then performance is in a very specific context. And that's the only thing that really means much, and that's what a resume looks like. And this little piece that's coming out is what I call a verified resume. Oh, I can do that, right? Maybe I learned. All right, I don't know if you can read that, but this is for a young man who worked for me from a very disadvantaged high school in Baltimore next to the Hopkins Hospital. And what happened was the program was attached to a Hopkins project on whether you could use cell phones to help people lose weight. And the kids were supposed to do two things. One was to lecture to other students about good diets and exercise, and the other was to call people who had signed up for the program and get them to come down to get weighed and the blood pressure taken and stuff like that. So this was a real job. It was a learning, what I call a learning rich job. It was supported by the Baltimore summer program. And so the first thing was responsibility. Now, I and some assistants I had gave the youngster a 4 on it, 4.5 on it. But the observation, which looks like a resume, is Keith actually managed, the XXX is to blank out his name, but Keith managed to make contact with 4 patients regarding the weight loss program. He came to work on time, he finished his work on time, and his writing indicates an understanding of the concept. That is, I gave them an assignment to write 250 words on what does responsibility mean. And then it goes down the list. Time management. He developed a schedule for contacting the patients. Writing, again, indicates he understood the concept. Oral communication. A rating of 3.5. He made 4 presentations to student groups about nutrition and exercise. He spoke to participants on the phone. He practiced speaking, and his voice needs more clarity and projection. Now, I signed this thing for him. That's what made it verified. And my judgment is this youngster can go to a college or an employer and hand them this. It's not quite a certification, but the world is much more complicated than policymakers and educators like to think. Every job is different. We had certifications for retail sales. So one of the things was customer service. Well, customer service at the local used car dealer is not like customer service at the Jaguar showroom. And no Jaguar showroom manager is going to hire you on the basis that you did what you did, or that you worked at J.C. Penney as opposed to Nordstrom's. As I say, these things have got to be in context. Now, there are problems here in the sense that my 3.5 may not be your 3.5. I think you got to train people, and we're trying to do this, train people who take in interns and who are their managers, and the National Academy Foundation has been trying to do that. You've got to train them, A, to come up with a decent job for the intern. Hopkins hires a bunch of summer kids. The kids usually hate it. The person who's supervising them, who's some secretary at the bottom of the pile, hates it. What am I going to do with this kid? Xerox sometime. But if you spend time and think, what's a learning-rich assignment? I'll just give you one example in this school that I'm working with and a hospital. So they got a surgery clinic. I said, what's a no-show cost you? $1,000. If somebody doesn't show up at the surgery clinic when they've made an appointment because they've set it up. Well, how about using the kids to figure out how to reduce the no-shows? That's a real important job. Otherwise, it's just, answer the phone. And then you build, okay, what skills do I need? I found with these kids, they could not leave a message on a cell phone tape that was comprehensible. So they had to be taught how to speak. The presentations they made to the other kids were lousy. So we practiced and practiced until they weren't quite so lousy. Now, is that the same as Obama making a speech on national television? No. But it's also different from, I'm talking to my girlfriend about where we're going to meet at the mall. So as we go into the certification business and the licensing business, A, we got to think about the soft skills. Many people would rather have a health person learn computers than a computer person learn the health industry. One of the things that I wonder that's in the IT certifications is the thing that leads to the fact that half of the IT applications have been deemed a failure. That big thing that they did for IRS recently. And it's not a failure because they don't know how to program. It's a failure because they don't know how to communicate with the client. And they, when you ask one of those guys to come over and show you, he taps away. I don't know what the hell you did. And he can't understand what my requirements are. So that's it. Okay, I've scheduled it, came to the end. Thank you very much.
So Dr. Packer has actually set the table for a lot of the questions that I think we have to grapple with that came out of the first 4 presentations. So let me just throw a couple of them out there, because in effect, you were kind of saying there's an open question in each of these certification processes. What skills are we actually most concerned about? And that might be what skills are we most concerned about for what age groups, but that's something we can discuss. Second, what's the assessment going to look like? How performance-based is it? How exam-based is it? That's an open question in a number of, that each certification system has to grapple with. And third, I think you were asking what function does a given certification or a verified resume or, but what does that certification, what function does it actually play in the labor market in that industry? And these are complicated questions, I want to break it down a little bit and ask our panelists to talk for a minute about the market. Let's see if I can do this in a way that doesn't sound too abstract, but the market in your industry, meaning the labor market, and what role do the certifications that you are developing or offering actually play in the labor market? Is it, does it, you got to have it or you don't play? It would be good to have. We hope someday it will be good to have. Where are you in the development in your particular industry sector of these certifications? So the rules should always be on these questions, and when we get to questions from the floor, that not everyone has to answer, but feel free to answer if you have something to say.
Well, I think there are, certainly in manufacturing, there's a credentialing that is required to get the better paying jobs. American Welding Society credentials, you actually have to demonstrate capabilities to do certain types of welds. The National Institute for Machining Science, the NIMS credentials, you have to show ability at certain levels of machining. And what this does actually is, it helps you bring people up to speed, because you always have systems within your own company, different quality levels that you're operating to. But I think we were talking to Jim Nelson in the room, Caterpillar, on how you train. They have their own Caterpillar certified welding program. And so we're talking to them in Illinois about, how about, how long does it take? I think it was 6 weeks, for someone to be, to get to be a certified Caterpillar welder. Well, how about if they have an AWS credential? Well, they still have to go through the training, but it'd only take 1 week. So, I mean, you save that time in getting someone up to speed, more quickly. And in manufacturing, time in lean manufacturing process environment is very critical. So the ability to react quickly, I think, is and bring people up. And then there are different levels as you go along. So there's a progression of skills, credentials that you can get moving forward. So I think that similar sort of things in IT and construction, as you go along.
So the question is, what role does the market play? Well, in IT, the market plays the most critical role, because the market is defining not only the existing jobs, but the new jobs that are coming up on the horizon, and certifications and the certification process can help define the skill sets that are needed to fill those jobs. So an example in IT would be cloud applications. The cloud, as recent as 2 or 3 years ago, when you heard the word cloud, you thought of something white and puffy up in the sky. Totally different today when you talk about that in terms of technology. And so you have, all sorts of IT professionals wondering, okay, well, what do I need to do to be playing in this new, really highly desirable skill set? And employers are saying, well, how do we define the knowledge and skill sets that we're looking for to be able to grow our cloud capabilities? And so the market is really driving that, working with the credentialing bodies, again, across platforms, but also vendor-specific technologies for Microsoft, for IBM, for HP, in cloud technologies. So the market plays an incredibly important role.
Okay. Roger? Oh, Steve.
I just wanted to add one comment, and I agree with Gretchen that within the construction, maintenance, and pipeline industries, I think I showed that the market is there. Within manufacturing, inclusive of what we do, there's huge opportunities for employment. What's unfortunate about construction is several-fold. First of all, oftentimes we as contractors don't do anything unless someone makes us, whether it's the owner that requires us to credential or certify or even train our workers, or whether it's some regulatory action, whether it's the Department of Transportation and Pipeline, or whether it's OSHA either at the state level or federal level, that requires us to do something different. So I think that's one thing that impacts construction and maintenance and pipeline. I think the other side of that is the layered activities that take place within the construction environment. Oftentimes, general contractors in today's market don't necessarily self-perform their work. They hold the subcontractors accountable for that qualified worker, for the credentialing and the training of the worker. And unfortunately, sometimes, or more often than not, they're not necessarily certified to be doing the work. So I think market makes a huge difference.
Yeah, very quick. Oh, yeah. I think to what everybody mentioned is the market is driving on two things. One, from a technology standpoint, for example, if you take a diagnostic tool, historically you hook that tool up to a vehicle and then utilize that technology. Today, you need to know how to use that technology before you even hook it up to a vehicle. Another part is in the aerospace, manufacturing arenas. Many of them in here understand torque, but most of us probably learned it by tights tight and too tight's broken. Okay, but if you're in mission critical industries, whether it's aerospace or solar panels and those things, you need to really know what you're doing, or wind industry, because if you don't, it's very costly and it can be life threatening. So these are legacy skill sets now that are coming back into the marketplace because whether it's Ron's industry or aerospace or manufacturing, because of the materials and technology, 3D prototyping units, those things that you start to pull together, that technology and that skill set is now part of a productivity standpoint, not just a manufacturing standpoint.
Remember that close to 80% of the workforce is in services. That I think healthcare now is getting close to manufacturing employment, and to a great extent, many of the people in manufacturing do not have to be on the plant floor. Now, health has been a licensed industry, so they've always had certifications. Sometimes these things, they've got to be very carefully done. In California, a nurse can put in stitches. In Maryland, a nurse can't put in stitches. This is not to have high standards. This is to protect doctors' jobs in Maryland. And one has to be very careful as that the standards and certifications do not become a guild thing to keep people out instead of letting people in.
So I want to ask one more question of the panel and then open it up to questions, because I know there's a lot of expertise and experience in the audience. But the question I want to shift to is the relationship between your industry credentialing program and higher ed system, the higher ed institutions, meaning in terms of delivery. Do they get involved in delivering your certification? But also the alignment of your certification to further credentials, whether in the education system, and how that plays out in your industry. You can use that one.
Well, at the NAM Manufacturing Institute, we've been working closely. I think about 6 or 7 years ago, we formed the Education Council, where we're working with community colleges and universities and some school districts, high school districts. But and then we just announced this year the Manufacturers Endorsed Education Alliance, sort of a seal of approval for the certification delivery systems. And this is, I think it's part of a strategy. We measure, how many people complete their 4-year degree in 6 years, right? And well, it took me 10 years, from when I graduated from high school to when I got my engineering diploma. But I had 3 major changes thanks to mentoring I got in manufacturing along the way. And I think the cost of higher education has become prohibitive. Average debt is about $135,000 for students graduating. So there's an alternative, STEM pathways available by getting credentials, engaging in the workforce, taking advantage of continuing education programs offered by employers. Our company will pay for anybody's work-related associate degree, and then we have loan programs for baccalaureate and graduate programs that we forgive over a 3-year period upon completion of the degree. So there are, there's strategies now for people to gain valuable work experience, particularly in the STEM fields, and also, be progressing along within the community college system, with 2+2 programs and on to university, or 3+1, whatever the flavor might be. So I think there's a lot of great potential, but what it is, it's a new model, for lifelong learning and just recognizing that. And so I think credentialing will play a very important part in helping people acquire meaningful employment. And I see, some great examples right now in our own state of Illinois.
Same thing holds for IT. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, IT certifications are baked into many post-secondary degree programs. Whether they're vendor-specific or vendor-neutral, they are tied hand in hand. And the model that we really love is the 2+2+2 model. It starts in high school with dual credit so that the kids are starting to get college credit while they're in high school and can get a jump start on their post-secondary education. But also, for many, many kids, moving on to post-secondary is not only an academic challenge, but it's an economic challenge. They don't have parents that can help them financially to pay for the cost to even go to their local community college. And so if while they're in high school, they get an industry credential that allows them to get a good paying job that can help pay for their post-secondary education, that's golden. And so we really are stressing not only the embedding of industry credentials at the high school level, but also at the community college level and further on. And just like manufacturing, this is lifelong learning. For people to continue to advance in IT, they're always going to be going back into training or education and getting and furthering their IT skill sets. And just one final statement about soft skills. When we talk about the skills that are embedded in industry certifications, they're not just the technical skills. Equally important in industry exams in IT are soft skills because of the role that they play, not only in getting applications done successfully and learning how to communicate effectively with the people that you're doing the work for, but all of the things that go along with just being a good person in a job. So those are very, very important, and they are included in industry certifications in IT.
I'd also add to that is all of our certifications are delivered through our community colleges, as well as our train-to-trainer, which actually brings in our industry professionals that work directly with the college on the delivery of that train-to-trainer. And as Gretchen just mentioned, the soft skills are absolutely important to it. Even as so far with NC3 as to what is the environment, what does that classroom look like, and the professionalism that instructor meets the students with, whether they are the youth in the emerging workforce or incumbent workforce, communication skills before and after the train-to-trainer, how all those things incubate themselves and migrate through the system are absolutely important in today's piece on technology. As you had mentioned, on the IRS piece, so somebody can put it in there, but when you ask the question, they go, I don't know. Well, what have you, productivity's pretty much stopped, right? It's kind of like having an iPhone with a dead battery. Okay, not a whole lot there. So those soft skill pieces are embedded, and sometimes we use the word embedded from a standpoint, well, it's there, but they're practiced, and that's a key part, and it's a part of our assessment and our certification and credentialing, especially on our train-to-trainer.
But to the question of affecting higher ed, one area that could use a lot of help is the math departments in higher ed. The first time I came across Bill Daggett's work, who spoke this morning was to show how little of what was on the math curriculum was ever used. And I've just had a recent experience where community college teachers were telling me they couldn't pass their students because the community college had eliminated courses like math for environmental engineers, and everybody had to go to take calculus, which hardly anybody uses outside of the classroom.
Okay, let's open it up to questions and comments, preferably questions from the audience. And please identify who you are and the organization you're from.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Dowd. I'm with the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. My question spans interests for both our CTE providers at the secondary and post-secondary level, as well as in workforce development. And the question specifically is based on those proprietary providers of some of these technical certifications, and in particular the tests themselves. We have a hard time coming about the outcomes, meaning did our students pass or did they not pass? And from the standpoint, if they're publicly funded in particular, meaning the curriculum is being paid for by state or federal funds, we think we should know the outcome pretty easily. But even from a workforce development standpoint, we would like to know just holistically across our state who has these certifications and who doesn't have these certifications, no matter how they come about them. Is there a way to break through and figure out how to actually get the outcomes for those certifications?
Well, interestingly enough, we have started a project on that very question. We did a pilot in the state of Illinois, data sharing pilot, between the state and CompTIA for our certifications. And the challenge is for credentialing bodies, you actually have a level of privacy around whether you are able to share the performance on those certification exams, that you have to get permission from the individual taking the credential exam in order to do that. And so what we do when we give our exam is we actually ask whether they're willing for us to share that or not. But even with that, there is a level of indemnification that we look for because of the issues around privacy. And so our data sharing pilot with the state of Illinois strove to figure out what we could do to be able to do exactly what you're asking for. And we were able to come to a contractual agreement with the state for students in the community colleges in the state of Illinois. And we were able to share the data under certain restrictions that fell along the lines of FSMA. And then the state was able to match what the data that we gave them with their own information, student information that they had. And there were a number of very, very valuable reports that came out of that, including cross-referencing the labor data, not only the academic data, but the labor data. So we recognize the importance of being able to do that. We've started the pilot. We're expanding it now to other states. And so we'll keep you posted on, and actually we're going to be expanding it to other industries. NAM has stepped up. They want to participate in this as well. So we realize that this is a very important nut to crack.
Other comments on this question?
And I'm not sure if you were referring to any specific type of credential or training application, but as it relates to NCCER programs, one of the credentials that we provide everyone is a transcript, and it is similar to what Gretchen talked about. It is personal and private to the individual that has either the learner or the assessment examinee, but all of our information is available through what we call our automated national registry. So any student who has been through a training program, anyone who has been through an assessment that has been provided by one of our accredited organizations, you can actually get to through their wallet card. We have a specific highly secure system. You can't data mine from it. As a contractor, I can't go in and look for every carpenter in the state of Indiana, but what I can do with those individuals that bring their wallet card or share that number with me, I can actually go in and look at every piece of training, every piece of assessment that someone has been in, whether it's been in Indiana or any other state.
That's really cool.
Another question from the floor. Sure.
Thank you. Emily Lebo, Boston Public Schools. I'm concerned about the cost of the credentialing, especially for poor urban students. Who's funding it? Because in our state, Perkins will not fund it, and the school districts can't. So who funds these credentials, and if they're really fundamentally necessary, how do we get them funded better?
Well, I'll start because it's here right now, and we recognize that that's an issue. CompTIA, as a credentialing body, is a not-for-profit. And the process to develop these credentials is quite expensive. So we do have a charge for them, and we recognize that it is a hefty price. And so what we've done is, through our Academy program, which is absolutely free to join, we provide better than 50% discounts on the vouchers for our credentials for students in public institutions in order to reduce the cost. But you're right, even at that, that can be a fair chunk of change. The rules around Perkins and using those funds for things like vouchers for industry credentials vary from state to state, sometimes from district to district. There are many districts that are able to use Perkins funds for vouchers. But if you're talking about, you know, credentials in construction and in manufacturing and in industry, you know, that can start to get to be quite expensive. So this is something that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, I think the you know, in launching the credentialing system in Illinois, you know, we do some funding through foundations to train the trainers to deliver credentials. There's often it is a way to get the system launched, but quite often I think companies, you know, once you get the job, you know, with you know, some basic credentials like the National Career Readiness Certificate or the Manufacturing Skill Standards certification, you know, then the employer will pay for you know, achieving the credentials, and so that's another resource. I think we account, you know, the business community accounts for about 40% of funding at all levels of education.
With NC3, once you know, without getting into all, once your instructor goes through train a trainer, the industry credentials that are available then to your student are provided free of charge. That's paid for by the industry partners, and that's you know, throughout your campus. So as you take those credentials in and embed them in your programs, whether it be you know, some schools elect to start in automotive and then embed them into industrial maintenance and so forth. But as you embed those across your programs in your school, those credentials are available to those students provided by the industry partners. So there's no cost to the students or to your school on that.
We have another question? Comment? And against the wall there?
Cindy Robillard, I work with the Vermont Department of Labor. One of the keys that we were introduced to, and we all know is true, is that portability is really important with credentials. And I wonder if any of you would be willing to address any particular successes around portability or any particular challenges around that.
Well, since Mike, I'll take that quick. Portability, yes, from the standpoint of there's several industry credentials that we do. For example, we think about one of the things that I mentioned already was torque certification. So if you think about torque, whether it's in manufacturing, aviation, energy, transportation, healthcare, if you have any implants and limbs that need to be bolted together, it's all got torque in there. So those credentials are designed to be portable across industry and work within those areas and be stackable into that. So and now there is some areas that are a little bit narrower focus, but in general they are still portable across the industries.
From a construction maintenance pipeline, the pieces of manufacturing we touch, all of our credentials are portable from not just industry to industry, but state to state, depending upon, very similar, depending upon what industry they work in. Similar also, I wanted to address that last question very quickly. As a nonprofit organization, our credentials are also free. That's something that we do provide to all of our students. We're funded through a different mechanism, such as an author, we receive a small royalty from our publisher. So there's no cost to the educational facilities for credentials or to the contractors or owners.
Portability is essential in our industry, in IT. You know, a Cisco certification is a Cisco certification in California and Maryland, but also around the world. CompTIA certifications are vendor neutral, and they have portability all around the world. So today, over 1.6 million people around the world have our credentials that are just as good in Singapore as they are in San Francisco. And that's important because what you're talking about are standardized skill sets, so that the employer, no matter where they are, knows that when you get an A+ certification or a CCNA from Cisco, you know what you're getting in terms of the knowledge and skill sets that that individual has.
Just briefly, I'd like to mention a couple of recent developments that will have big impacts on this. One is the badges approach that's been funded by MacArthur, and I forget who else is working with them, where you can pick up lots of badges. The second is the recent legislation passed in California that requires the state university to accept courses passed from wherever. That is, if Pearson wants to make up a proprietary course and you take that course in college algebra and you pass the test, that's a must-have. So I think you're going to see a deregulation of the higher education system, and the professors and academic deans will lose some control, and portability will be a great part of that.
We have a question over here.
A question for Gretchen. I'm John Huppendahl, Superintendent for Arizona, and the question deals with the certifications for the for Microsoft and Cisco and Oracle. Specifically, I'm familiar with Microsoft and Cisco. Can you provide a little detail as to the nature of the certification provided by Oracle, and then the contrasting certification that might be a more open type of certification, and give us a little bit of a texture for what the difference might be, the number of hours required, the depth of knowledge, that type of thing?
Oracle, just like Microsoft and Cisco, have their own academy. Right here, there's about 7 different certifications, and I have copies of this that I can, anybody who's interested, I can give you a copy of this. To tell you the truth, I'm not an expert on Oracles. I would go to their website and look it up, and if you want to give me your card, I can get you the name of a person to talk to over at our Oracle that can explain it to you. But they are becoming more expansive in the public education system. I know in Chicago Public Schools they have an Oracle Academy because of the importance of database, increasingly in healthcare. With the new electronic health records, there's going to be a real need for people who are very knowledgeable about database and database administration and database security, and that's just one example. So I think you're going to see an increasing importance in that.
We're coming to the end of this session, and we've just scratched the surface, but I want to ask one question to the panel, which is, if you were looking 10 years out, 10, 15 years out in your industry and with your certification systems, what would you hope it looked like? What obstacles that you are currently banging, your head against would you like to have jumped over, and what would it look like 10, 15 years from now?
Well, I think from 10 years from now, we have a little over, I think, 1,200 community colleges, Brian, I think, and the impact of those 1,200 community colleges that cascade to high schools, to middle schools, that includes not only student, teachers, the incumbent workers that are out there that need that all 1,200 of those schools, whatever they're aligned with, are involved with obviously the core training, but they are issuing and working with their students and their industries for that credentialed workforce. To Gretchen's point, they are global skill sets. And so whether that student graduates from a small town in Iowa or Chicago or wherever it may be, that the company they go to work for is going to be involved in a global economy, and that they have that skill set that they can move to Vermont or wherever they need to be to get that job and build their career. But I think the key thing, and it's not a challenge or a problem, it's all of our community colleges, and I think everybody's up to the speed, up to the task to do it. It's a matter of implementing. We know the issues, we know the competition. In a sense, I think that is our Sputnik moment, is to say, okay, we've got the information. Some of the questions are going to change tomorrow. That's okay, because technology is going to change tomorrow. So let's implement and let's go. We're going to skin our knees a little bit, but that's okay.
I have to agree with Roger. I think one of the words I've not heard today from any presenter is that dreaded word, immigration reform. But then I look at that from a very positive way, that with our global economy, we ought to have a way that we can transfer skills between states, between countries, that we can move employees from country to country. So global, I feel, in our terms, is the word of the future.
My goal from a perspective of 10 years in the future would be to have many, many, many more students actually finishing their high school education, closing that gap on the dropouts that we have, and getting those kids into the workforce with industry certifications. That also means closing that, over 250 to 350 open IT jobs, so that a good number of those students are filling those jobs happily, entering the workforce with great career opportunities, and making our economy that much stronger because of it.
Well, I think the vision of the Pathways Initiative, where you have the private sector, the educational community, and your community, all working together and to common cause. So I think what I have seen work very effectively is when the private sector gets involved with their local school districts. And I particularly think we have a challenge, in the K through 8 area, middle school. We're just launching a program at St. Charles, Gateway to Technology. My oldest grandson, Doug, is in the 7th grade. He's in the class. I went over to take a look at it, and lo and behold, there were more young ladies than there were young men, in this Project Lead the Way pre-engineering course.